My name's Chris Jones. I think most of you know me by now. Occasionally I speak, and this week I'm going to give you part one of a part two message, of a two-part message on the gospel, the good news, salvation. We're saved, but from a different perspective. Typically, when we talk about this, you hear theology come up of after we die, heaven and hell, and I'm not going to be speaking on any of that. I'm talking specifically about the gospel of the here and now. And there is a gospel for the here and now. It gets overlooked a lot, but I want to talk about it. Now, when I was coming up for the slide to give to this, it's very difficult to come up with a slide that kind of defines the gospel without it getting really religious. And I wanted to kind of come out of religion to give this message to get the different perspective. So I came up with this slide here. And to me, this kind of represents the gospel. There's something in this picture that represents hope. It also represents past the picture you see here. It represents here and now, but it also speaks to the future. In this little sprout that I don't even know what it's going to grow to be, but it's going to be something else. And it's not guaranteed, it's not absolute, but it is the potential of. It's hope. And that hope takes us to life. And it also kind of shows the demonstrated behavior of God in this miracle of life, of how he does it through seed, germination, process, and then life. I think when we're surrounded by so many miracles, it is easy to kind of lose the fact that we ourselves are miracles, the fact that we are here. So that's a good point to jump in. I'm going to read to you John chapter 1. Verses 1 through 5, and that's going to where we start. It says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. All things were created through him. Apart from him, not one thing was created that has been created. In him was life, and that life was the light of men. That light shines in the darkness, and yet the darkness did not overcome it." The prologue of John is pretty depthy, and I want to just jump in with there. It says in the beginning. So what does that mean? Where does it start? I think it means in the beginning. I think it's talking about singularity. I think it's before the Big Bang. It's the moment before time and mass and all this wonderful stuff that we know of as life even started. It was even having some more technical. Hold on a second. See if we get around it now. So I'll try not to move around. But it's at this moment before everything begins that it says in the beginning was the Word. So it's before everything began. And it's in this moment where, again, God's defined behavior and singularity reminds me of a seed germinating. And from that moment, whether you know it or not, everything that would ever be in the universe was in that moment. You was in it, I was in it, everything after us was in that moment, the potential of what could happen. And it says that in the beginning was the Word, was with God and was God. Now when we hear this word in the Greek, it's logos. And from a religious background, when you hear logos, typically we think of the Bible and we're taught it's the Word of God. But John is saying here, later on, he says the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us. It is saying that logos was actually Jesus, that the Bible speaks about logos. And we hear logos, and the truth, the church has kind of kidnapped that word for themselves, and we've made it our own. But it is a Greek word. It's a classical Greek word, and its usage is in philosophy, Greek philosophy that predates the New Testament. Logos, actually in definition, means as an embodying an idea. It means principles. It's kind of a higher thought. It's in those moments of who you are. So it reads very strange, and we try to make it literal, and you can't get literal with this. It is in this strangeness that in the beginning was logos, as an embodying an idea, a higher thought. And that was Jesus, before time began. Now, as we get later on in the verse, it says that in him was life, and he was sent to us, and in him was life, and that life would be the light of man, that would not be overtaken by the darkness. So if I'm going to read that and understand it, it sounds like this to me, that in the very beginning, when God is creating things, before we get to singularity, and then in that moment where all things were, he knew that when it came to us, there was going to be a problem. There was going to be a moment, a time when all humanity would lose life and start to move into the dark and be overtaken by the dark. But in the beginning was Logos, as an embodying an idea, higher thought. And in this thought would be life. And at the right time, Logos would be dropped into humanity, and Logos would bring us life. And that life would keep us from being overtaken by the dark. It's weirdness, right? But that's what it's saying. But what is this darkness and what is this life? Well, that takes us to the other in the beginning account, and that's in Genesis, and it talks about Adam and Eve in the garden. And the Bible gives us this imagery that from a tree, a serpent would give us a fruit that is poison for humanity. It's in the ideology of good and evil, of how we define it. I'm not going to get into that right now, but I want to talk about this other thing. But the Bible also gives us the imagery that from a tree, Jesus would give us the fruit that is the antidote to the poison. So this antidote to the poison is for all humanity. So once we move on and time progresses, we get to John 10:10, and then Jesus, Logos, shows up. And he says this, he says, I am the good shepherd, and I came that you might have life, and you might have it more abundantly. Now that life, that word, is the Greek word Zoe. And if I was geeky Greek, I'd say Zone or Znoe, but I'm not. So I just say Zoe. But I've always heard that it's the definition means life spiritually. After you die, you will have life and it will continue on. But that's not the literal translation of that word. That word means life here and now, as well as life spiritually after you die. So what Jesus was saying is, I am the good shepherd. I came that you might have life here and now and in the future after you die, and not just with you, but past you and on to everything else. He's talking to humanity. He's not just talking to us in the micro. He's talking in the macro too. Now, I will tell you, when I told you the Bible gives us the imagery that from a tree, a serpent would give us a fruit that is poison, and then from a tree, Jesus would give us a fruit that is the antidote to the poison. Anytime in the Bible where you see fruit, it represents behaviors. It represents attributes, what comes from those behaviors, the results. So what was Jesus' behaviors and results? Now we start to see what the actual antidote is. Well, Acts 10:38 says Jesus went about doing good. He went about doing good, healing the sick, casting out demons. He fed people by the thousands. It says that he was a good shepherd. And I want to kind of get into that just for a second and would like to get a three-dimensional rendering, if you'll allow me that, of Jesus' personality and from what perspective Jesus came to humanity from. Because it says that Jesus made himself a servant even to the cross. Now, when we hear servant, we think doormat, and we think less than. We think almost of something that you don't want to be. So was Jesus less than? Was he a doormat? I don't know. There's other places in the Bible where it says that Jesus got a whip. And I don't know where he got a whip, but he got a whip and he started overturning tables. He did it twice. And he told other people, your father is Satan. And he told other people, you're a pit of vipers. Jesus was confrontational at times. Was he unhinged? Did he have an anger problem? He did not, because he says, I'm the good shepherd. Because I think that's demonstrating the attributes of a shepherd, a good shepherd. See, what a good shepherd does is that makes you sure that the sheep have a place to graze, have some water, and a place to sleep. But the thing that we don't talk about a lot is when the wolves come, and the wolves will come, they always come. And now it's the shepherd that has to defend the sheep. And that's what Jesus was. He was a shepherd defending the sheep. In every place in the Bible where you overturned the tables and called out this person, in every one of those places, those were people from a religious aspect in the name of God that was hurting the weak. Jesus was manifesting that shepherd's attributes, and he was protecting the marginalized. He was protecting the weak, because that's what a good shepherd does. So now I have to look at this other place in the Bible where it talks about the servant. Does this mean he was less than a doormat? That doesn't line up with this shepherd thing. There's another place in the Bible that says he's the second Adam. And I think in that word we will find the three-dimensional rendering of Jesus and kind of what he was about. The second Adam, what does that mean? It means the first Adam was what? He was a steward. What's a steward? If I was put in stewardship over you, it works like this. As a steward, I have to take care of myself. I'm a good steward of my own life. When I'm hungry, I will feed myself. If I need rest, I make sure I get rest. If I'm hurting, I make sure I encourage or comfort myself. If I need to get to the doctor, I take myself to the doctor. I take care of my needs. Now, if I'm your steward, that means when you're hungry, your hunger becomes my hunger. And I'm responsible for making sure that you get to eat. If you have need and you're hurting, then I have to make sure that's taken care of because that's the same as my pain. That's the kind of servant I think is saying that Jesus was. He wasn't a doormat. He was a good steward. That's where you hear he went about doing good, feeding thousands. And I think you've heard me talk about before, he gave and he healed and he took care of people based on need, not deserve. Deserve had nothing to do with it. I'm always, and you see it comes around online. Somebody will inevitably post and say, Jesus ate with sinners, and somebody else will say, yes, but Jesus didn't sin. I think that's just weird that you felt the need and compelled to say Jesus didn't sin. That's just an odd thing. And I think it's weird that we think that Jesus ate with sinners, because I don't think Jesus saw us as sinners. If we think of why Jesus was, he was Logos. Why was he sent here to bring life? What does that mean? He's seen us all as diseased, sick, and dying. All of us. So why did he eat with people that we would call sinners? Because he didn't see them that way. He's seen it was somebody that was hurting and needed encouraging and comforting, so he's encouraging and comforting. He allowed people to dote on him, kind of odd, but that's what they needed. Because he was a good steward. Because he's seen us all as sick, diseased, and dying, and he wanted to help us and bring us this life. Now, after Jesus demonstrates this, of being a good steward, of being a protector, of helping, giving, based on need versus deserve, he gets to the end of his ministry, right before he goes to the cross, and then he tells his disciples, now this is my commandment to you, is that you love one another as I have loved you. By this the world will know you're my disciple. How did they see him love? Well, he went about doing good. He was busy bringing life. He was busy taking care of the needs. He was being a good steward of everyone that had the need, of humanity. Now he says, you're going to do what I did. Continue what I did with humanity. Take this to humanity. Now, I'm going to speak to you in a strange way. This is going to get a little weird. But from this idea, we get the religion of the worship of the deity of Christ. And in the religion of the worship of the deity of Christ, it's a strange thing because we thank God for what he has done for us. We take the fruit, the antidote, and in that antidote is a seed. It is Logos. And it tells us that we're to ingest that. We begin to grow on the vine, and we begin to be a part of the antidote, and we bear the fruit of the antidote. But what we do is we take the seed and we put it on a pedestal, and then we thank God for what he's done for us in sending us Jesus, and then we come up with kind of our own culture of how we live in church and how we live in our life. Strange. But now there's this other place where he talks about discipleship, or Jesus just told us, what I want you to do is ingest the antidote. You grow on this vine and you begin to produce the antidote to all humanity as well. See, you can be in the religion of the worship of the deity of Christ and have nothing to do with discipleship. And if we're being honest with one another, the vast majority of the church and us have lived our lives from this posture. And I'm using worship incorrectly, by the way. I'm just doing it so you get the imagery. Worship, by literal definition, is in discipleship, because what worship is defined by is bowing or submitting your will. Paul calls it crucifying the flesh. It means if your nature is not to bear this fruit, the antidotes, and do what Jesus asked, but yet you go do it anyway because he has commanded you to do it, at that moment you're bowing your will and submitting to his will. Now you're in a place of worship. That's what Jesus asked from us, is that we just fulfill and do what he asked. So you can be in the worship of the deity of Christ and have nothing to do with discipleship. But now, strangely enough, you can be in discipleship and have nothing to do with the worship of the deity of Christ. I'm going to give you an example of that. And again, this is weird. This is all just so you get an external perspective of what we internally do. There's this young man. He was going to college. So he is lucky enough to go abroad and study in London, England, in law. That's what he is going to study. Now, he's from India. He practices a form of Hinduism. The only reason why I bring that up is because it's relevant to what I'm about to share with you. Now, this was the very early 1900s. He was from East India. British rule was over India, so he basically grew up as a second-class citizen in his own country, which is a strange thing to me. But he was afforded the opportunity to go and study law. But he does something that I appreciate. He begins to challenge himself in his own beliefs of his own faith. And what he does is he gets other religions' books and he starts to read them from front cover to back cover. And then he will go to those religious leaders and allow them to try to convert him. Now, he doesn't debate them, but he challenges himself about what he really believes. His whole idea is he wants to come off with what he believes is the truth spiritually of how he is to live his life. Now, he also does this with philosophy. He does it with atheism. Atheism he rejects. He says he can never be a materialist, and he's a theist. So he's going through all this stuff. Well, now he comes to the Bible, and he's had kind of a bad experience with Christianity. When he was younger, growing up in India, the missionaries kind of made fun of him for his religion. So he wasn't really good on the Christians. But he got the Bible and said, I'm going to read it. And he read it from front cover to back cover, like he did with all the religious text. And he said the Old Testament was boring. And he said the book of Numbers was painfully boring. But he read it, he said, because I wanted to be able to speak to it. And he said, but when I got to the New Testament, things began to change. He said, Jesus' teaching started to speak to me like scripture. And he said, the Sermon on the Mount spoke directly to my heart. And he proclaimed, he said, Jesus is one of the greatest teachers of all humanity. And this guy's going to be an easy convert. So he goes to the religious leaders, and he goes to many different denominations, contemporaries of his time. Again, this is the very early 1900s. And they were teaching something in the church back then that has formed how we come together and has changed kind of how we do things in the religion and the worship of the deity of Christ, but we really don't teach it anymore. But it was heavily taught back then. And it is this, that Jesus' teachings is not literally meant for you to obey here and now. That his commandment of love is not for you. It was for his immediate 12, his immediate disciples. And this other teaching is good ideas, but it's not literally for us either. And this he adamantly disagreed with. He said, no, we are to be disciples of Christ. We are to try to fulfill this commandment of Christ of how we see it. And if you'll take his teachings, you'll do better. You'll be a better person. And they said, no. Jesus came and died for your sins, to cover your sins, so after you die, you can have life. That's what Jesus is for. Now, he wasn't good on this either, in all transparency. He said, I want to own my own behavior. I want to improve myself. And he says, you can do this with the teachings of Christ. So he rejected Christianity. He would be a Christian if it wasn't for the Christians. And that's kind of how it was. Now, he would graduate and go on to practice law. He went to South Africa, but he never gave up the teachings of Christ. He took this commandment of love, and he put it in his macro, in his compass of how he went through life. And he made sure that whatever he was going to do or not do would have to be filtered through this commandment. He took it literally. He took Jesus very literally. Now, once he got in South Africa, against the early 1900s, he ran into the apartheid. Man, this guy can't win. And if you don't know history, when he got to the apartheid, Indians at that time in South Africa weren't even second-class citizens. Well, he's a lawyer, and he says, we're going to fix this. I'm going to do something. So India is a really large country in East India. So you had Sikhs, Muslims, and Hindus. There's a lot of cultures, and they're very factioned. They're very broken. But he managed to get them together and said, we're going to civilly disobey some things, and but you're going to be a part of it. But listen, he says, you have to, he used the phrase, turn the other cheek. I cannot be a part of anything that goes outside of the commandment of Christ, out of love, from his perspective. And so they obeyed, and he took a beating, and he turned the other cheek. Long story short, after some turmoil and time, he was able to get some basic laws enacted, which gave him second-class citizenship, which is weird. It's part of moving the needle. It's a process. It's not an event. And after a time, he decided he wanted to go back home to India and live out the rest of his life. Now, when he got to India, he found that there was two things. Number one, revolution was right. They wanted their country back. So they were ready to go. They were ready to revolt. They were ready to fight. Number two, he found out that the newspapers had been reporting on him in South Africa, and by his own words said it was exaggerated. They made me sound like something I wasn't. However, the newspapers had been reporting this, and all of India believed that he was that man. So the Sikhs, the Muslims, and the Hindus, they all came together to him and said, listen, we want you to lead us in this revolt. So I can't imagine what they were thinking he was going to say. I know if you know anything about Sikhs and what they do, they were ready for this. Their whole religion is based, when it's time for war, you go to war. And that's why they carry the sword, the saber. So I did in this meeting, I imagine what they think is going to come out of it. And he says, I'll do it, but it has to be under this commandment of nonviolence, of love. And they're like, what? I guess they imagine, hey, how are we going to get funding for the weapons? What's the strategy? How are we going to fight? What are we going to do? And he says, no, we're not doing any of that. We're going to peacefully protest because I can't have anything to do with it without love. Matter of fact, if anybody hits anybody or fights back, I'm out. I can't have anything to do with it. I'll step aside. And they were afraid of that. They knew they'd fall apart. They were too factioned. It's a strange thing in this turn the other cheek of how he saw it. See, he's seen it like this. It was a little different than us. He said that all people are not evil. There is no people that's evil. There's no people that's good. We're just people. He said, the British aren't evil. He goes, if you want to know the truth, I really like the British. He said, but their actions are evil. And he says, when they hit you with what's going on, not just in general, but with this specific situation, and if you hit back, he says, hate spreads the poison. You can't fight hate with hate. You'll just make more hate. And he says, if you'll turn the cheek and let them hit you, there will come a time where they say, I can't hit this person anymore. I can't just beat an innocent man. He said, but you make it at a moot point if you hit back. Now it's a fight. Now they feel justified. And he said, I don't want them to leave as enemies. I want them to leave as friends, but I want them to leave. It's a weird thing. It's this idea that the oppressed is going to teach the oppressor the error of their ways and show them a better way. Is that not counterintuitive? That's different. That's weird to me. That makes me stop and think and say, huh? But that's what he did, and that's what they did, and that's how they went about it. And they were beat, and they had to turn the other cheek, or he'd quit. There was even a slaughter. They were killed. Now, there was times when they couldn't take it anymore, and they started fighting back, and immediately he stopped, and he went to fast. And he said, I'll fast until I die. And he would. He'd start fasting, and they start falling apart and breaking up, and they realize, we have to have this guy. He's the only thing that keep us together. So they would stop, he would eat, come back and say, okay, now let's continue. There was one time his kidneys started shutting down. He was dying. He meant it. He was going to die. He was not going to have anything to do with it. But if you don't know who I'm talking about Mahatma Gandhi. There was his relationship with Christ and how he's seen it is what brought him this idea of this love, this nonviolence, and he would watch as the British left as friends and not enemies. Strange. And I'm going to be honest with you. If you go online and look anything to do with Mahatma Gandhi, it's false information. He is a lightning rod of politics, and it's even the church.orgs, they've got false information that he was this and that. Other religions try to claiming it's all over. I got all of my information from him, from his autobiography, my personal experiments with the truth. So this was all from him. Now, was he a flawed person? He was. He was a flawed person. But do we require people that do bigger things in life to be perfect? I would tell you that it's not the best of us that change the world for the better. It's those of us who are obedient to the commandment of Christ, that take it like he did and take it this to use to help other people. I'm also reminded of the scripture that says, if you had the faith of a mustard seed, you could say to this mountain, move, and it would be moved. Don't kid yourself. If you were back in that time, in the early 1900s, and all of this would have happened, every jaw around the world dropped and hit the floor in disbelief of what had happened. That this frail little man with this idea of love that he had gotten from what he called the greatest teacher of humanity, one of the greatest teachers of all humanity, with his commandment of love and how he loved. Now, I would tell you, how did Jesus define a disciple? He said, by this, the world will know that you're my disciples, by how I loved. By that definition, is he not a disciple of Christ? Am I wrong? I don't think I'm wrong. But yet, he had nothing to do with the religion of the worship of the deity of Christ. I told you it's very strange, isn't it? Makes you kind of look at yourself in the mirror. Question yourself. What if, like, right now, there's over 2 billion people on planet Earth that claim to be a Christian, that in one way, shape, or another, they claim that they follow Christ. But the vast majority, that's 1 in every 3, by the way. That's a lot of people. What if everyone that proclaimed to be a Christian, 1 out of every 3 in the world, started moving into discipleship? I'm not saying give up their religion. I'm not saying stop in the religion of the worship of the deity of Christ, of how we see it in that culture of what that is. But we start taking that and we start moving into discipleship. I think we would change the world, would we not? It goes back to that message of life. The light that the darkness could not overtake. I think there's a strange thing when we think about this idea of turning towards Christ. That's in this idea of that turning towards Christ is somehow turning our back on humanity. I think it's actually the opposite. I think turning towards Christ is actually turning and facing humanity. And as we begin to ingest this commandment, this logos, this word, this higher thought of God, this life of humanity, and we begin to bear that fruit of love without judging of who deserves it and who don't, without condemning, without condoning, and just like Christ being a good steward and a protector, I think we start to hear the voice of Christ. It comes from the hurting person. It comes from that person that had need. I think this was the idea of the gospel for the here and now, of a higher thought of this life. It was the fix of humanity for the poison, but it should come from us. So this was part 1. This is just to kind of set the stage and give you the idea of an outside perspective. Next week, we'll talk about the inside perspective, what it means to be in the religion of the worship of the deity of Christ and move into discipleship and what that means. But I would challenge all of you, and no matter where your faith or where you're at in your relationship with God, is that from the beginning, make a part of trying to move in some sort of worship in helping humanity and helping those who are hurting and have need. That the gospel can go through you and on to others.